I want to go back to, so yeah, my thought process. So where was I up to? I wanted to pass on experiences to, say, a child. I'm like, so how would you do that? Well, when I think about it, it's like, well, just tell them, just talk to them, tell them this is right, this is wrong, do this, don't do that. And then I pause for a second. I'm like, that sounds familiar. It sounds like exactly what my parents did for me. Did that hasten my development into where I am currently? Maybe to a degree, but not like as powerful as or as quickly as I wanted it to happen. So I'm like, okay, so just telling someone what you've learned, what you've experienced, that doesn't work. It's not as effective as I think it could be. So then what's the next step? Okay, well, for me, how did I learn these lessons? How did I understand and realize them? I experienced them. I'm like, okay, well, then that means if I want to teach a child or someone younger than me or the next generation, and I want them to grow quicker than I did, then they should experience these things earlier, faster, more often than I did.
Yeah, that makes it. That makes a lot of sense. So I think that removes one of the tricks. I guess as a parent, you often it must be hard because even as someone older, you can see a mistake about to happen because you've gone through experiences before, and the ability to express to someone that experience, but then hold back that you don't constrain them to undergo their own experience and failures is where the line is. So I think in your case, what you're sort of suggesting is that you can pass on the knowledge, but there is no expectation that it will be taken on board. But if it is taken on board, then they might get ahead because they know knowledge that you didn't know when you were at that age, I guess.
Well, I think about it like this. Anytime someone has told me something, anytime I've been in a class or something, or someone has just, okay, this is dry. This is what you need to know. This is how it works. This is maths. This is science, whatever it is. There's only a certain amount of that I remember. And it has very little influence on how I make my actions. Like there's very little tangible to it other than someone has told me. It makes me aware of something, but it doesn't really make me understand how, like, the implication of going with it or going against it. It's not until you actually do something and experience it with all your senses that you realize, that is what it feels like. That is what it feels like to touch something hot. That is what it feels like to fall off something high. That is why I want to avoid it. So if someone just tells you something, you've got an awareness of it, but it's got very little influence over your actions. So you'll look at jumping off a roof into a pool and you're like, yeah, that looks safe. Oh, that's good. Like there's no way this could go wrong. But then you might do it and you might experience it and you might miss the pool. And then you're like, oh, wow, there's actually greater danger to it. And so now you are aware of it at a much deeper level. Your whole body is aware of it. So next time you are in a situation and you need to make a decision where that is a factor, you're going to remember that. You're going to remember that experience, and it's going to inform your decision making a lot more than if someone just told you, don't jump off of a roof into a pool.
Yes, and I would say you can still speed up the evolution process after the person's had the experience that you wanted to prevent them from, because at that point in time, they've got the questions and their mindset's open enough to take the knowledge actually in. So I think I sometimes fit in this category. If I sit in a lecture first to be taught something, it kind of goes over my head. I don't absorb it because I guess there's no relative position for me. So there's a lot of questions in my mind. And when there's a lot of questions that I can't ask or get answers to, then the more knowledge they're giving, the more it breaks down for me, because it's like, hang on, I haven't answered this question. You're just stacking more knowledge on top, and I need to resolve this fundamentally first. So for me, often it's like, okay, here's the topic. And I like, okay, just leave me alone for a bit. Let me think about it and play with it from my own intuition. And then after that point, then allow me to come and ask those questions. And then I get that knowledge. And I think for me, that's a rapid way in which I can learn. Now, if I don't have someone to turn to after the point of failure, then I have to figure out that failure, what failed myself. And that might be it might be short, but it might be a very long trial and error process. At that point, if someone comes in with the experience and explains, these are the factors, and I've actually gone through it tangibly, I can reflect and go, yeah, you're right. Actually, thinking back to my own experience, that's what I observed as well. And it was only you that was able to talk to me about this that allowed me to think of it from that perspective. So even though you go through the experience of the failings yourself, you can still evolve at a greater rate than maybe the older generation relative to you, I guess.
Yeah, 100% agree. And that's more of, okay, how do you best teach someone something? And I think I do agree with you there, where it's like you got to have that little bit of exposure to it, and then it's like someone's instead of you spending the tens of hours figuring out why that went wrong, someone comes in and goes, oh, this is why it went wrong. I've spent those tens of hours. This is why. And I think maybe that could be then where the role of generations comes in. You are the older generation who has put in those tens, hundreds of hours, comes in at that point that they've had that enough stimulus that they're like, okay, now I'm interested in this. Now I want to know the answers. It's like, well, here are the answers, so you don't have to spend those hours.
Yeah, correct. I mean, ideally, as a parent, I think this line is what you want to try and straddle, isn't it? So you want to stop your kid from doing things that's going to be detrimental to itself, whether it's going to be breaking a leg or being hit by a car, whatever it is. You're trying to set up those where they no-go zones, I guess. But there's areas in which you know that they're going to make a mistake, they're going to fail, but you want them to go through that experience themselves. And then your role is to then support them after those failures. It's to, I guess, as an ideal parent, you give as much experience to your kid as it can cope with comfortably, or somewhat comfortably, or a little bit discomforting, but as much experience as possible. And then through the failures, you want to support them after those failures. And where you can, when we talk about the support, maybe it's just emotional support, but in other areas it might be support of knowledge. So it's like, okay, the kids failed. Okay, now they're ready to take to the knowledge because they've actually had the experience, which is something that's is important for them to be able to understand that knowledge, which I'm going to present to them.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part of parenting. I mean, I agree with all that you just said there. Most of, I won't say all because I don't know. I'd have to go over it with a fine tooth comb to say all. But yeah, that's got to be the hard part, is like, that they have to experience, again, going back to last time with pain and discomfort, they have to experience a certain level of discomfort for optimal growth, optimal learning. And then it's going to be difficult to them because you've been through it before, but you have to kind of have that bigger picture where it's like, it's better that let's say they touch a hot mug than put their hand in boiling water. Like, it's better that they have a small scale experience that gives them kind of an idea about where this leads to if you go more intense, and then you fill them in with the rest of the information.